Okay. I hope this is working. I'm going to try and keep this kind of shorter than usual because it's been pretty long. Okay, so I'm going to do some Gaza updates. I know I'm probably going to get messages, people saying you don't look very well, you don't sound very well. I'll just be upfront. I'm not. I'm really not well. It's being sorted. Who knows? I'm getting an autism assessment, but I'm not well. I'll just be honest with you. And that's why you might be like, oh, your face looks puffy. Yes, it does. Because my face puffs up when I cry, and I just cry all the time. Okay, so we're going to do an update on what's going on in this situation. I want to use my channel to try and help. I just want to say as well, so on Saturday, it's a day of local action. So I'm going to be going to a protest near me. If you're somebody who's disabled like me and you don't go to London, look for people near you, join solidarity groups. Like I'm part of like I'm on a WhatsApp group. It just really helps to have a community of people who are feeling the same way, and it really does, like, I can't recommend it enough, like in terms of revitalizing you, because the images that we're seeing are so horrific, and sometimes to be in a group of people who care and, you know, to just try and like plan like what the next steps are, it's just been absolutely like mentally life-saving. I feel bad for saying life-saving when the people in Gaza are literally losing their lives, but you know what I mean in terms of mental health. And you can also like find a use for your skills, or, you know, I've found that to be really useful. So I'll be letting you know how that goes. I'm going to that on Saturday. Okay, so as of the day I'm talking to you, which is Wednesday the 7th of February, there's been no let-up in what's happening in Gaza. So what we've actually had is we've had Israel bombing Rafa. Bear in mind, I feel like we're at this point, I say this every video, it's so obvious now. It's so obvious, and it makes you feel crazy because from the very start it's been obvious that Netanyahu has used this opportunity to try and cleanse the land. Right, to ethnically cleanse the land, to take that land, to finally be rid of Gaza, to basically make it all Israel. Couldn't have been clearer, right? And these calls of like, you know, bring them home. When I say like I find that makes me so angry, it's not because I'm angry about the idea of the hostages coming home. Like the innocent people being held there, like Noah, who's 26. There's children there, you know, that I believe those two little boys, I don't know if they're still alive. You don't even know because Israel's bombing it, but this is my point. If like it's just this massive lie that everyone's just letting go past them, like the emperor's new clothes, and I feel like I'm going insane. Because the hostages are in Gaza, Israel is bombing Gaza. Now, their actions in bombing mosques, bombing schools, bombing all these places, those actions are not rescuing the hostages, right? So the hostages are just being used as a bring them home as a slogan. But the reality is that in order for them to come home, there needs to be a ceasefire, right? And if you're stopping aid getting in to Gaza, and even for the most cynical people, you know, who only care about Israelis and only care about the hostages, if you're stopping food, water, and medical aid getting in, and thousands of innocent people in Gaza are suffering, how do you think that medical aid and food is going to get to those hostages? Like, I feel like I'm going nuts. I feel like the world is going nuts because when we say there needs to be a ceasefire, innocent people are being slaughtered, and the ceasefire is just the start. It's the most basic thing, and yet it's been framed into this radical thing. A ceasefire is radical now, and that's deliberate because obviously after the ceasefire, there needs to be like there has been real corruption. There's been occupation, ethnic cleansing. I mean, obviously, I don't need to go into the history of Gaza. You'll know that if you're on this channel. And I'm going to put some links to some books that are really good on that in the description box. But that's the first step. And I think they've deliberately tried to make that into like a radical thing. So calling for a basic ceasefire, which basically means we do not want anybody to be killed. Like, we just want the killing to stop. They're making that radical so that, again, it sways towards Netanyahu. It basically gives him more bargaining power, right? And I really think the reason why he's not letting up and he's still doing this is because he knows that the moment this does end, like they're in a sort of, I think Owen Jones refers to it as genocidal mania. Owen Jones I've disagreed with on things like, I think early on with the anti-Semitism situation in Labour, and again, there's anti-Semitism in society, there's anti-Semitism all over the place. But very, very early on, we had people like, you know, Heather, who's my friend who I did the podcast with, and we're planning another video. So Jewish people in Labour were being called anti-Semitic when they were expressing anti-Zionist views or criticism of Israel or speaking about their experiences. And very early on, Owen Jones was somebody who kind of bought into that, and I felt like he was kind of taken in, and he kind of also went along with the whole crank left thing, which is so frustrating because when you see his content now, which I think is incredible, I think he's kind of seeing it, if that makes sense. I mean, I completely get it, because I know that, like, when I first started, looking into this stuff, you are hesitant and you're thinking, oh, what's the truth? And, when people have been smeared as cranks, you kind of are wary. Like, I've spoken about that before. But when you actually look at the situation, like, I feel like a great wrong was done to those people, and those people came before Owen Jones, and he kind of jumped on that. I think he's doing a wonderful thing now, but I still think we need to look further back. Like, it's become apparent now to a lot of people, like, the extent of it, but clearly this has been I still think that what happened to people like Heather and those early conversations about what's anti-Semitic and making criticism of Israel anti-Semitic, the idea of BDS, peaceful boycotts, anti-Semitic, has led us to here now. Because now it's like it's got to a point where that kind of went along unchallenged, and the people who did challenge it, many of them Jewish, were called like cranks and smeared as self-hating. And now we're at a point where they're calling the idea of a ceasefire this far left extremist thing. It's so basic. Everything has shifted. The Overton window has shifted. But Owen Jones talks about genocidal mania, and his content on this has been phenomenal. Like, I really do think he's actually put his neck out in a way that a lot of journalists aren't. And I have to give him credit for that, because I'm just ashamed by our media, people who you think are good people, to just excuse what is going on, this genocide, and not cover it. But a genocidal mania is kind of sweeping Israel right now, and Netanyahu's whipping that up, right? That sense of like nationalism, and we have to get rid of these people, and it's like this fervor that there needs to be something that's going to stop that and cool that down. It's just so out of control, and Netanyahu, I think, he knows that as soon as that does stop, he's going to be done for war crimes. So he's just trying to cling on and create as much chaos as possible. We've got Biden. I can't quite believe we the UK and the US, right? We're bombing Yemen. Now, Biden is bombing multiple countries. Now, it is really like 1984, and I know it's so overused to say it's like 1984, but it really is. Because I can't quite believe that the US is bombing all these places, and then they'll come out with a statement which is, the US supports freedom and doesn't want things to escalate. No, you're bombing multiple places. That is only going to escalate things. It's such a lie. It's such a lie. And, in our country, in Britain, in England, we've got a situation where, when I was on Question Time, for example, it's seen as being anti-Britain or talking down Britain to criticise what we're doing. And again, that's another arm of the dangerous fascism, right? Because we spend so much time trying to prove, to these nationalistic people who don't care anyway, they're not in good faith. I don't hate Britain, I love Britain, all that stuff, and I won't fall into that. I said in my other video, we're lucky here to have the right of freedom of speech, right? And the right to criticise and the right to dissent. The right to disagree. That's how things are made better. And it is these people who are like shielding themselves and pretending to be these patriots who are really what they're trying to do is stamp out dissent. We've had Suella Braverman, I believe it was yesterday, she published this really disturbing, I don't know if it was an article, calling like the ceasefire marches like terrorist supporting, like extremist hate marches. These are ceasefire marches, right? And it's deliberate, because if you're framing a ceasefire march as far left, right, and this dangerous terrorist thing, then that's intimidating for people. It also means that when it comes to the point of like, no, well, actually Palestine needs its freedom and there needs to be an end to occupation, it makes that very, very simple truth, which is that those people should not be occupied, it makes that into something extreme, right? If you've made a ceasefire extreme, which it's not, it's the very basic human thing that anyone on any side of anything should be supporting, that's how it's all shifted, and that's the intention. Right, so the people in Gaza, they are told, right, they were in the north, they were told, and bear in mind that Israel had no right under international law to make them move. They told them, if you don't move, we're going to kill you, you're fair game. So disabled people died, lots of families stayed, they didn't want to take their things, they were frightened, people were being killed on the roads, there were stories of people being bombed on the way to places. It was terror, right? That's terror. Israel is acting with terror. That's terrorism. Be consistent. Be consistent. These people are not consistent at all. But then they were told to go to the south, so many of them went to the south, and these are people that keep relocating, and then they're killed in refugee camps, they're killed in hospitals, they're killed on their way to the south, they go to the south. Now they're being told, Rafa. Sorry, I had to get the door, hope you're still with me. But then we've got Rafa, right? So this is, again, a place that was meant to be safe. So early on, and people believed this absolute rubbish, that Israel was actually being, you know, a humane army because they were telling people to go. There's nothing humane about that. That's been going on for so many years as well, like well before October 7th. I think I watched this in 2021. I watched like a live feed of them destroying buildings, right? And they would say, "Oh, you know, we've told them in advance," and everyone was like, "That's all right then." It's not. Are people incapable? Like, imagine if that was London. How would we feel if we looked and we saw the skyline of London looking like Gaza? How we would be absolutely petrified. People don't seem to be able to use their compassion and their empathy. So they're being told, so Rafa's now being attacked, but they were told that was going to be safe. Now we've got people like Netanyahu openly saying that they want, you know, they want to cleanse it. They're being so open. He's saying we don't want a two-state solution. And again, like, the idea of a two-state solution at this point is just, it's madness. People are just saying, oh yeah, there's got to be two states. Well, if you believe in the two-state solution, where on earth have you been? What, so after all these people are being massacred, now what? So, you know, Netanyahu's saying, you know, there's going to have to be a big Israeli presence there. And people from here even are saying, oh, well, you know, we shall have to decide, you know, who governs the Palestinians, you know. What right do we have to do that? And at least be consistent. You know, they're not sitting there saying we have to remove Netanyahu, right? They're not saying that. Now, Netanyahu and his forces have killed more innocent people than Hamas did on October the 7th. Yet it's not we have to remove Netanyahu, it's we're arming Netanyahu. And yet we're having these discussions about we have to remove Hamas, of course. You know, they can't possibly be in charge. Where's the consistency? If killing innocent people is wrong, and say you're committed to the two-state solution, and I'll be completely honest, like, I think it should be one state. My perspective on this, not that it holds much weight, is that there should be one state and that everyone there should have equal human rights. You know, the very notion of how Israel is running at this point as well. You know, the idea that you can go and live there if you're Jewish. You know, it's like a birthright. It's believed to be a birthright. But if you're a refugee who was forced out during the Nakba, your family still can't return. You have no right to return. It doesn't make any sense. Like, an ethno-state doesn't make any logical sense to me. It doesn't make any logical sense to me. I don't have any ill will against Israeli people. Like, people are just people wherever they are in the world. But we're not just going to sit there. Surely we're not so crazy as we're just going to sit there and act like that's normal. No, that's why. It doesn't make any sense. I do feel like going a bit crazy on that. Like, this idea, you know, the two-state solution. Suddenly people are saying two-state solution now. And what I can't quite get my head around is just so transparent, because Palestine needs to be its own state, right? The people, they are entitled to that. It's not for them to be given that. They're entitled to that. And where all the peaceful options were taken out, right? So you've got peace marches, people being shot, you've got Israeli occupation, you've got the settlers, you've got Israeli settlers breaking international law, breaking the rules from the 60s that were put in place. No one did anything. People weren't talking about a two-state solution then. You know, and it's just now Gaza is being reduced to rubble. Now people are saying two-state solution like a cover. I don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, if you're someone who believes in a two-state solution, what are you doing and what have you been doing to make that happen? And surely you can't believe that a two-state solution is going to work with Netanyahu and those people in charge. Like, how? It doesn't make sense. And this whole framing as well as this being a war. Even now, like, I feel like I'm going mad. This is a captive population being starved, having their water cut off, medical aids not being allowed in. You've got groups of Israeli protesters dancing and blocking the aid trucks. That's evil. That is evil behaviour. This is not a war. And I saw a tweet earlier on X, it's not Twitter anymore, about how, you know, oh, everyone's fearful of the IDF because, you know, they're one of the best armies in the world. Well, are you? What, you're shooting civilians in a barrel, basically, because they can't get in or out? I mean, what? If anything, I mean, you've got to be pretty rubbish, haven't you? I mean, if you've actually got a captive civilian population and you're killing thousands and thousands of them, yet you still don't seem to be able to recover the hostages or get Hamas. You keep saying, oh, there's these tunnel systems under this and under that, and then it's not there. And then you say, oh, we've got intelligence that the refugee agency people were involved in October the 7th. And then it turns out Channel 4 did an investigation. The smallest amount, it was the smallest amount of accusations, and now it's not something that can even be backed up, so you're taking away the aid. That's not like a strong army. Is everyone mad? I think if you have a captive population, just bombing them to pieces while you deny what gets in and out, and you're still finding yourself unable to complete your aims against people who are being starved, who are in siege condition, who've lived in a prison camp, that doesn't say much for your skills as an army. And I really, like, take away the US funding, take away our backing, and what's Netanyahu got? Essentially, like, what's he got? I don't know, it's just unbelievable to me, and it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. And I think I am realising, like, you know, I said to you at the beginning that I'm getting an autism assessment, and I think I am autistic personally. A lot of things make sense, but something that really sticks out to me is that I feel like sometimes I will, like, see something and I feel like I'm going crazy, like the Emperor's New Clothes, or like, you know, Cassandra when she gets visions of Troy, right, and people don't believe her. It feels like that because I feel like people are saying things, like politicians are just saying things about two-state solution and this and that. It doesn't make sense. How can you be pro two-state solution while you're arming the person who's massacring one of those potential states? One of those potential people. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. Everyone just sits there and agrees. Like that's normal, but it's not normal. What the US is doing is not normal. What we are doing is not normal. It's not normal to arm a regime like that who's being investigated for genocide. It's really not normal. And then people are frightened because, and again, you know, I think autism makes a lot of sense because I often put my foot in my mouth and I say things that other people wouldn't necessarily say. But, you know, when you think about, for example, Holocaust Memorial Day, which was recently, and yet it's being tied to the Palestinians, right? As if the pain of the Jewish people and the suffering in the Holocaust of the Jewish people is somehow being connected to the Palestinians. What on earth has that got to do with the Palestinians and Gaza? Am I going nuts? Am I going absolutely nuts? They didn't do that. They didn't do that at all. And I don't see how it's disrespectful personally, and maybe it's just an autistic thing, to look at patterns and similarities. And I understand that it can be really offensive if you, like, say to it, you know, to hurt a Jewish person with the pain of what's happened to them and their family, and to hurt them in that manner, I can understand can be awful and, like, can be a real hatred thing. But if you're looking at patterns and you're looking at genocidal behaviour, you're looking at, I don't know, I just think we should learn. I think we should learn, and I think people need to understand, like, we don't teach. We've got these people in this country who are so, like, patriots, and Winston Churchill was the biggest white supremacist. He was a nasty monster. You know, he was against Hitler, but not because he particularly disagreed with him. You know, I think when we look at situations like the Holocaust, and I think a reason why a lot of people here use that as a reference is because, you know, we're not taught about other genocides. Like, we're not. In Britain, when you think about the British Empire, like what was done in India, for example, it's evil. It's real evil being done. But we're not taught that, obviously, because they want us to be, you know, British myth, and, you know, we're always the good guys. You know, they're very, very afraid of critical thinkers, dissent in this country. It's really bizarre how, like, right-wingers, like real right-wingers, are kind of acting like they're so cancelled and etc, etc. When really, it's we're not teaching the truth. Like, we're just not, there is an objective truth. And we don't teach about that, the British Empire. We don't teach about any of that. And that filters into everything. Because, for example, you get people who are like, oh, why can't Britain be for the British? And why isn't it white? And the streets aren't the same as they were anymore. There's brown people. If you don't teach about empire and colonialism and how entwined we are with different countries and why that relationship exists, you're just going to get a load of racists because you're not explaining how it all works. It's all connected. Everything's connected. So when we talk about, like, when people talk about the Holocaust and genocides, no genocide is the same as another. There's different motives, there's different groups, but there are certain things we can look out for when it comes to genocide prevention, right? So it's like the dehumanization, the making the people out to be animals, forcing people into conditions which are really dangerous. I mean, before, when we look at the Holocaust, and, like, this is something that I studied, the thing that I've always found so disturbing and distressing, really, is not, it's the years before, because that's when the groundwork was laid. It wasn't like suddenly Hitler did what he did out of nowhere, like a sudden madman just did this. No, this was put into policy. It was carefully, over years this went through. And how did that society let that happen? And what was the propaganda? Like, how was that being sold? It's those years. So that's what we got to look out for. Now, when people are saying, oh, you can't call something a genocide. No, we have a responsibility to watch those stages and watch those steps. And people forget, of course, in the Holocaust, people weren't just sent off to the death camps straight away. People were put into ghettos. People were starved and made sick. And the Nazis actually used that. They used the idea of making people sick, hoping that they would get ill and work themselves to death and all these different things. Like, and they say, oh, don't say that. And I'm thinking, I don't understand why, and maybe it's me being autistic, I don't understand why making, like, parallels and words people find more offensive and dangerous than actual acts and violence and pain and killing people. I don't understand that morality. It just doesn't make sense to me, and I think that's why I get in trouble with what I say, but I don't understand it. Maybe it is me being autistic, but it doesn't make sense to me. Now, what we're seeing in Gaza is it's not just bombing, it's the starvation and it's the sickness. Now, it's a very similar, I see similarities there. And that's not just like it's not just a Nazi thing. Like, it's, if we look at, for example, people in this country don't want to think about it. Look at what happened in the British Empire and look what we did to India. Like, it's this, they all act, all these great evils act slightly differently. They all do. And I think it's, that we are only taught about the Holocaust. And I think part of that reason is because it's, in Europe and it wasn't British done, if that makes sense. Although, acting like there wasn't extreme anti-Semitism here, and lots of people here were pro-Hitler, right? And what he believed in, it wasn't what he believed in that they disagreed with. That's why we're taught that one, because we were the good guys against Hitler. But then we're not taught about British Empire. We're not taught about all those other things, so we don't see patterns. And so this idea that the Nazis were a unique evil, I think we're taught that because there's no denying that they were a great evil, and they were unique in the sense that every wicked regime has its own way of doing things. But acting like that is a singular evil that can't be repeated in different ways is really dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous. And I think, honestly, I think it's a really wicked thing we do in Britain, because it's like we want to act like we're the good guys. And then we act like we didn't partake in these great evils and we didn't have concentration camps. And they don't want to talk about the fact that, for example, Hitler was inspired by us. He was quite admiring of the British Empire. All these things that they don't want to teach. Right, now the UN is warning that there's going to be a large-scale loss of life. And this is the most recent news I've got. Basically, there's thought to be an Israeli ground invasion in southern Rafa city. 1.4 million displaced Palestinians are there. Now, if you've seen the footage of, if you look at what the IDF are putting out, look at it yourself, you're going to see glee and joy in what they're doing. And it's what you're actually witnessing is people who are committing evil acts who don't realise because they've dehumanised their targets. So to them, we might sit here and ask, how can they be dancing? How can they be dressing up in dinosaur? Well, when they're in a war zone, because it's not a war zone, because this is not a two-way war, is it? You've got a captive population, is essentially what's happening. But, we look at that and we wonder how, and we just think, I think it's also wrong to assume that these are just evil people, like, as in, they're just naturally, No, that can happen to any of us wherever we are. What we're seeing is extreme nationalism. What we're seeing is the complete dehumanization of the enemy, even down to the children who are seen as threats and seen as animals. This is what we're seeing, because we're seeing young people in Israel who in any other situation, I'm sure, would be good people. I really believe that. I think it would be foolish for any of us to think that it couldn't happen here. That kind of situation that happened in Germany, that has happened in other places across the world, couldn't happen here. But there's a complete dehumanization. So there's able to be this joy. They are actually enjoying what they're doing, because to them it's like a game. It's like they are trying to get rid of cockroaches, right? They're not getting rid of people. You're seeing people gleefully blowing up buildings, and they no longer see those buildings as that's a place where humans live. It's just... It's like this mass game, and it is a mass hysteria. It's this kind of genocidal mania that I think Owen Jones does get right when he says it's like a genocidal mania that's gripped the Israeli population. you've got people in Israel now who are speaking for a ceasefire being attacked by other citizens. So then you've got this 1984 topsy-turvy thing going on, where you've got Zionists who are killing children and openly want to cleanse the land and are fine with that ideology, then saying never again, but they're shifting the power dynamic. So if we don't teach about power dynamics, and I guess I talk about this on this channel with like abuse dynamics, but power is a huge part in any situation. Like when we talk about reactive abuse, sorry if this is going all over the place, but power is everything. In this situation, Israel has all the power. In what war have you ever seen where one side is able to turn off the power, the water, stop the aid getting in, to take pot shots at kids, to shoot animals, just like for fun, to be making TikToks while they do it? Like, in what? That's not a war, right? In a war, you have armies against each other. They don't have time to be doing this. This is sport. This is fun. This is not a war. Israel has all the power. They have all the power, and yet they are acting like they are the victim. They were the victims on October the 7th. Innocent people were victims, but they are not, in this situation, the victims. And in fact, even before October the 7th, we are looking at an oppressive power who has had the power. The fact they're even able now to turn off the water and stop food getting in and medical aid, and that there are checkpoints, should be alerting people. I don't know where people's critical thinking skills are, that there is a massive power imbalance. So even if you don't know the history of the region, are people not thinking, one side literally has the power to close the crossings and stop people getting in, and to, like, one side has an iron dome and is armed by the US. And this is another thing. What I don't understand is when people talk about Iran backed Hamas, right? They talk about Iran arming Hamas, but they never talk about US backed Israel. Why is that? It just doesn't sit right with me that you are the occupier. You are the power that is killing these people. And we can all see it, but we're all playing a game of Israel is the victim here. They're not the victim right now. The Israeli victims here are the hostages and the families of the hostages, right? I would argue brainwashed IDF soldiers who've been taken in by this nationalism from a young age, and they're now being sent in by politicians who don't care about them, who will just take out whatever they can for their aims. But Israel as a state is not the victim here. Israel is a colonial power, right? Israel is in charge of what's going on in Gaza. It is so obvious. Like, how can it possibly be a war when one people are occupying the other people? It doesn't mean that everything people do in the name of resistance is good, obviously. You know, obviously it doesn't mean that. But I think it just makes me angry as someone who's British, because we do this ourselves, and it's really successful on us, because we act like we're this little island, and, you know, old manners and cues and please and thank yous, and a lot of our media class is like that, you know, trying to act like, if it's Stephen Fry-ish sort of people, you know, that kind of, oh dear, oh golly gosh, you know, that kind of facade. When we actually had one of the most powerful empires, and we didn't win it through anything good. You know, and it ties back to the immigration thing. We're still now demonizing asylum seekers and refugees. And it's like, what do you think happens when we colonize, right? When we take money, what we did to India, for example, when we hijack countries, when we just bomb people to pieces in the Middle East and we think that's fine. And then we act all surprised when there are issues, right? Or we call countries third world, or we talk about, you know, oh, they're terrorist countries and that kind of thing. And they don't want to talk about the pattern, the psychology, the way it's taught, because in doing so, the people in charge of Britain lose their power, because to understand abuse structures and to understand power dynamics means that we would get wise to it. If they taught that in schools, we'd get wise, and they'd never get in again. Never. Essentially, and I think, you know, some people are like, oh, you know, Israel's so powerful, it's controlling everything. No, it's not. It's not that powerful. It is backed by the UK and the US. It's not some Israeli conspiracy. It's the fact that it's useful for us to have an ally in the Middle East who we see as more Western, and we're going to support settler colonialism, and basically, I'm going to say it's racism in the sense that Israelis are read as more white and Western, although obviously not Israelis are all white. Of course we're going to support those people. And that's why we're inconsistent when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. Because it's not actually about any sort of principle, and it's not about teaching people about standing up against injustice or anything like that. It's literally about what suits us and what benefits us, and the US are doing the same thing. And also, I just want to say this before I go, and, you know, I'm probably going to get like a ton of hate comments on this at this point, but I feel like I have to say something. We desperately need a ceasefire, right? And they keep saying that all sorts of things talking about, oh, Hamas isn't accepting a ceasefire. We need an actual ceasefire. Do you understand? Do people not understand that a temporary ceasefire only means, oh, we ceasefire while the hostages come out, and then we're able to kill the people again. We're able to keep killing your civilians. Now, think logically. Who's going to agree to that? Who is actually going to agree to that? Whose benefit is that in? Like, who? And this idea that the ceasefire itself, which is neutral, which should be neutral and for human rights, is somehow this pro-Hamas thing now. No, it isn't. You know, a ceasefire needs to be a proper, permanent ceasefire, not just, oh, you stop for a couple of weeks, because the last time there was the humanitarian truce, people were still being killed in Gaza. People were still dying of sickness, right? They didn't have aid coming in, they were starving, people were shot. It just meant there wasn't bombing for a while, and then the bombing just happened again. And that isn't something that, logically speaking, people are going to accept. Because, no, if you want people to stop dying, it's not, oh, stop killing people for a bit and then start again. It has to be, no, the killing stops. The killing stops and something is worked out. I think what we're seeing here and in the US, and obviously in Israel, as we're kind of allies, unfortunately, what we're seeing is this complete dehumanization of the Palestinians. And it's become so normalized, so commonplace, that to see the Palestinians as human beings, the same as us, with the same souls and humanity as us, is now being seen as dangerous, extremist, and controversial. The dehumanization has gripped so many people. And it does make you think, it really does, like, you do think too. And again, I'll use the example of the Holocaust because that's a reference point that we are taught. There are other genocides and have been other terrible genocides, and we have taken part in awful, awful things that happened. This isn't like some unique thing that the Nazis did. I mean, technically it is in the sense of how they did it, and the machinery of that operation was just devastating. And I've never really been able to stop thinking about it ever since I thought about it and like studied it. And the psychology of it is just terrifying, to think that human beings can become monsters. And it was all the people that just let it happen. Like they just didn't ask. They were like, okay, those people have been rounded up. Let's put them into ghettos, and then we don't really know what's happening to them, and we don't really care. We don't want them here. They can go. That mentality has always stayed with me, and I think it's why I feel so strongly about when we dehumanize like asylum seekers and things like that, and we dehumanize minorities, because that's kind of where it starts. It doesn't start with we're going to kill them. It happens over time. Are trying to make it seem radical to see the Palestinians as human beings. Truly. You know, when you see posts, like massive posts online about the terrible things that Israel is doing to Palestinian civilians, many of them that are children, thousands of children, and like I've seen some just such disturbing things that I can't unsee. I'll never be able to unsee them. Like sometimes I have nightmares of these things that I've seen because they're so horrific. Like for me personally, I just think when it comes to children especially, for me, you just don't recover from seeing it. You just can't. Like, there's nothing and nobody as innocent as a child and should be as protected as a child. And that's something that just haunts me, essentially, to think that those children are suffering and what they've been through. But when you'll see a post about what's going on, people from here will be saying, well, Hamas shouldn't have done this, blame Hamas, like, I guess that's their fault. Or they'll say, they probably asked them where they were on October 7th, were they celebrating it? Children, literal children. It's all about who we see as acceptable collateral of war. Because Israel is putting out, and has been putting out, well, October the 7th happened, therefore, what's happening now is the collateral of war, unfortunately. Like, war's a terrible thing, and that's collateral, and I don't think this is a war. But that's what they're saying. And, people accept that. But imagine, like, thinking the other way round. By that justification, Hamas could argue that they're in a war and you're the occupying force, and yeah, civilians were killed horribly and civilians died and it was horrific, but you know what? That's just the consequence of a war. Now, which one of those two? It's the same argument, and I would argue that in terms of the dynamics, probably the Palestinian argument there is stronger. But who do we see as acceptable collateral? Now, it should be that nobody is. No innocent person, no child, nobody, no innocent civilian is ever acceptable collateral. But the same people who talk about the awful things that happened on October the 7th, and some things which it turned out, the whole 40 beheaded babies thing, I really think we should have been wary early on when things like that were coming out, because it was clearly this idea of we need to come up with something so horrific that it excuses bombing the hell out of people. But it now seems that people don't even need that, because people were more willing than I even realised to jump into that mania. But who do we see as acceptable collateral? Because people will empathise with those hostages, as they should, right? People will empathise with the Israeli innocent people and then hold nothing for a Palestinian child. Who is acceptable collateral? And we have been raised here in Britain, I can only speak for Britain, but although I think it's the same in the US, we've been raised to see places that are like Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria, Middle Eastern like Palestine. We've been raised to see those people as acceptable collateral, so we accept it. And I think we just have to say no. They are not acceptable. They're not acceptable collateral. No innocent person is. And we need to have consistent principles. And I mean, it is denying their humanity, and at heart that's racist. It's just pure racism. It is denying that those people are the same as us. Same souls, same feelings, and it's this huge racism. And I guess it goes back for a long time. I think after like 9/11, obviously it really got pretty bad. The way we're so comfortable with bombing, like just on the news, oh, we're bombing Yemen. And everyone's just like, oh, okay, fine. Imagine if we were like, oh, we're bombing Paris. We're bombing Paris, by the way. Yeah, that's the Eiffel Tower. We exploded it. That wouldn't be the same. But we're so numb to it, and we mustn't be. Anyway, thank you for watching this. I'm going to put links in the description box. Medical aid for Palestinians, the Oxfam Gaza appeal. There's local action on Saturday. Please don't be intimidated by people like Suella Braverman who are trying to pretend it's hatred. Like, you know in your heart. Ask yourself this, right? And if you know in your heart that's not what this is, then just hold your head high and keep going. Keep going. I believe it does matter. Yeah, thank you for watching. I will see you really soon, and I'll just be praying desperately that first step is that ceasefire, and it seems so difficult to even get that. Just praying, because every minute that passes, every day that passes, that's more precious lives, either people being killed or their lives being destroyed. Yeah, thank you for watching. Love you, and I'll see you really soon. Bye.